Hi, Tisha.
Hi, Jen. Has it been a while since we've done this?
It has. We've had cancellations,
I feel out
and
of
I don't
practice.
know. I feel really out of practice. We haven't gotten back into a rhythm of doing it. Like it was intermittent over the summer, and we haven't gotten back into like the weekly rhythm of it. So it does feel weird. Like I was literally just looking around, like, where do I press record?
Yeah, but we're back.
But we're here,
We
and we're
are.
at episode 3 of this season, which is
Yes.
exciting. And I don't know, before like anything else, I have to say we made the decision to upload the unedited video footage from all of from our recordings moving forward. And if I find the time, I hope to post back catalog stuff of that as well. But we're uploading the unedited video footage to our Patreon, which you have to pay to be a member, but it's only $5 Canadian. So for US folks, that's like $3 or something. Super cheap.
Yeah.
And it just helps to pay for things like our Zoom subscription, our Podbean subscription. Just there are costs associated with the show, and we want to keep doing it. And
Mhm.
so check that out. And until I think it's October 5th, which could very well be today when this episode launches, so maybe I'll extend it. But we're offering an exclusive sticker. I designed it and it reads unstable like my internet,
Yeah.
which is basically, I feel like, become like a mantra for the show, this
Yeah.
pandemic founded Zoom era show of ours.
Because we always get the unstable warnings. Your internet is unstable.
And
While
it's
we're
like,
recording, we're like, yeah,
just
just
like
like me.
me. So anyway, that was the long way to get around to say you should check out our Patreon. It's linked in the show notes. It's on our website,
Yeah.
and definitely support us over there. So teacher, you're like officially into the school year. Are you finding a rhythm at home and at work?
This week
Either?
it's hit me. Like 3 weeks in, I'm like, oh gosh,
Yeah.
I gotta slow down, not burn out, because this is a marathon. And
Yes.
I have been sprinting for 3 weeks. And this week it's hitting me hard. So, gotta, you know what? Say no, take care of
Hmm.
myself, get enough sleep, like self care.
And use those like breaks that you do get in your day
Yeah, to like actually rest.
to have some
Like,
time. Like I know a lot of times it's
yes.
prepping for other parts of your day, but using that time wisely so that you get at least some time to breathe.
Yeah.
I feel that because I just started a job at a local pizza place,
Woo, woo.
which Tisha was the first person to send it to me, and a couple others also sent it to me
Oh, really?
when the guy who runs the pizza place posted it. Oh yeah, you weren't the only one. And I worked my first 2 shifts last week. I did work for a few years in restaurants when I was in graduate school. And working in film production, you're on your feet all day too. But I will say, it's been a long time since I spent 4 straight hours on my feet. And that first day, I did my shift, picked the kids up from school, came home, and I work out with my neighbor across the street. She's a personal trainer and has built a gym in her garage. I was done with all of that at 4:30. At 7:30, I was passed out on the couch snoring. And the boys looked
Okay.
at my mom and like they all looked at each other and they're like, who's snoring? And the boys were like, I think it's the dog. And then my mother goes, no, it's your mom. So
That
there's an adjustment.
could be, yeah, exactly. You know what? It's an adjustment. And so many of us out there are just, I am trying to think of the phrase, but we're going through the motions,
Just
right?
getting it done.
And
This,
pushing through. And we got to take care of ourselves and,
yeah.
take time to connect with other people, listen to
I,
shows like this.
yes. Or listen to shows like this while you're doing the things. My
Yes.
podcast listening time is when I am making lunches in the morning or cleaning the kitchen or cooking. That's when I
Yeah.
listen the most.
Yeah. They call it task pairing. Have you heard this phrase before?
Yeah, I've heard it from you, or like I know of like habit stacking, which is also like I think a similar kind of thing. Like
Yes.
I trick myself into drinking more water by saying I have to drink like this jar of water before I can have my coffee in the morning.
Yeah. So task pairing is when you pair like an undesirable task with a desirable task. So making lunch, for example, isn't exactly fun, but there's a podcast you really want to listen to. So you listen to the podcast while you're doing that thing, and then it makes your enjoyment of that task so much better. I am known for bringing an iPad into the kitchen and like watching Netflix while I do things in the kitchen. My husband's always like, you really like your technology. I'm like, listen, I could be pissed off because I'm making lunches and washing dishes and cleaning the kitchen, and I've been in here for an hour and I'm just exhausted. Or I could just be happily buzzing along and watching my show while I do all those things. Don't you just want the happy self?
There was a time when like it was a thing to have a TV in your kitchen. Like we never did. Like either little ones that like folded down from like the thing above, or like places for TVs. Like it was for like fancy rich people, but like people
Yeah.
did have TVs in their kitchens.
Yeah.
I have, if I'm in a show and I'm binging it, I will definitely bring my laptop into the kitchen. And one of my favorite things to do when I used to decorate huge batches of cookies, I would watch The Office because I've seen
Okay.
it.
Okay.
Because I've seen it, right? So I know it. I don't need to like watch it, but it was like
Right.
enjoyable background noise for me
Yeah.
when I was doing
Love
it to
it.
keep me awake.
You
Really
know what could
liked
be
it.
fun though is if our guests send us a message and tell us what things they like to do while they're listening to this show.
Oh, yes, yes.
Do
What
they
do you
task
do
pair?
while you're
I
listening to
want
the
to
show?
know.
Are you task pairing? You can email us at thenowuppod@gmail.com or DM us on Instagram or
Facebook.
Facebook or wherever,
Yep.
because we want to know if you task pair, because I imagine you're a busy human too. This week's episode is with a mom talking about parenting, but kind of parenting through a really unique situation. Definitely one you don't hear about very often.
Mm-hmm.
And it's with a local mom from the school too. So there you go. It's all in the
It
family this
all,
week.
yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, we're talking with Amber and her story of divorce and parenting through that and grief and all the things.
Mm-hmm. You're gonna love it.
It's going to be great.
Yeah.
And
And we recorded this one a while back. We've been sitting on this one, saving it for just the right moment to release. So we hope
yes,
that you love it.
yes. And if you do, when you do, leave us a review, check out our Patreon, and share the show. If you have a friend, share the show.
Yeah, that's the best.
That and reviews are what help us grow, and they don't cost you any money. And we will love you forever. Hi, and welcome back to the Now Up Pod. I'm Jen.
And I'm Tisha. Today we are here with Amber, who is a fellow mom that Jen and I know. She actually lives in Jen's community, and her children attend the school that I teach at.
It's all very incestuous.
Yeah, she actually filled out an application, which of course guests are always welcome to do. And we're just honored that she's willing to share her story with us. So welcome, Amber.
Well, thank you
Welcome.
for having me.
Of course. Yeah, we love it when people apply to be on the show. And
Because we feel like we don't have to like force them to do it. Not that we force anyone, but
well, we meet people every single day and you don't know what their story is. And people have stories and they have stuff to share and they have their own wisdom, but you would never know that. So when we go out, sometimes we go and we look for people who are sharing their stories publicly, but there's so many people who have these stories that we just would never know unless they actually apply to be on the show. So thank you for that. And we are going to talk about your relationship with the father of your children,
Mhm.
who is also your ex-husband. How did you guys meet?
So we actually met in grade 7. We had homeroom together at the local school. So him and I both grew up down here. And, I was the good kid who went to class and he was the bad boy.
All right. That's a classic story right there, isn't it?
Right? It's like a
Yeah.
movie.
Yeah, that's for sure.
So you met him in grade 7, but you didn't start dating then.
I
assume.
mean, we dated as you would in grade 7 and grade 8, a week here, a week there. It wasn't, I mean, we were friends more than anything. We went
Mhm.
our separate ways for high school, and then we got back together when we were about 18.
Okay.
Yeah. And, I was finishing up high school. He had finished a little bit early. He had gone to one of the BTIs in Scarborough and had done a couple semesters of co-op and had graduated about a semester early. So he was already in the workforce when we got back together.
Just for, us Americans, what's a BTI?
A Business and Technical Institute.
Yeah. So it's a high school that's more focused on trades. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. I figured that's what it was, but I just thought, anyway.
Yeah, so I mean, we were together for about a year, and I mean, he liked to party. I wasn't much of a partier, and he really went downhill in that year, and he started using hard drugs unbeknownst to me. It was never really my thing to get into anything like that. And we ended up breaking up about a year later, and he spent about 4 months in a rehab facility. He got out of that rehab facility and we got back together a couple months later and got pregnant with Hannah. I mean, things were never great between him and I. As far as I knew, he wasn't using drugs, he was clean. And the more I know about it now, I realize that he wasn't. A lot of things kind of came out of the woodwork after we separated and after he passed away. Just little stories here and there that lead me to believe that he wasn't clean while we were together. But in any event, we had Hannah when she was about 2.5. We got married. We bought our first house and we got pregnant with Thomas. And we actually found out we were pregnant with Thomas the same week we bought our first house. So that was kind of nice.
The big week.
Yeah.
Yes, it most definitely was. And then less than 2 years later, we had Charlie. In that time, we also moved houses. And like I say, things were never great. They were okay. But I mean, you could tell he struggled. He definitely struggled. His weight would yo-yo when he was, in my opinion, using again. And I mean, he tried. I think he really tried. I think he had a lot of demons. He struggled quite a bit with his mental health. And I think it got the best of him over time. In June of 2017, we separated. And unfortunately, his drug addiction spiraled out of control. And it was kind of off and on. I mean, I know he had tried to get help. He had gone to rehab a few times. He had been in the hospital a few times. But he always kind of wound up back in the same place, the overdose, the struggling.
Mm-hmm.
He saw the kids, for the most part, on a regular schedule for most of the time we were separated. And then in March of 2021, unfortunately, he succumbed to a drug overdose and he passed away.
Mm-hmm. It's a lot.
It's a lot. Well, and when you referenced stories that you have heard over the time, like since you separated and then since he passed, I know in my situation, there's a lot that comes up after a person dies, especially when it's as untimely as Paul and as Warren. And I know our situations are very different, but I definitely personally had a really hard time reconciling with a lot of that. And I don't know if, obviously different circumstances, but it's like jarring because you can't do it. Like you can't have a conversation. You can't do anything.
Right. Yeah, it's unsettling because you think you've lived this life, this one life, and it turns out that it wasn't really the life you were living. And it just leads to more questions. What else was going on that I didn't know about?
Mm-hmm.
What should I have known about? What should I have seen? How naive was I that I didn't pick up on any of it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It does. It makes you question your own judgment.
Absolutely.
And so when you separated, it had nothing to do with the drug use.
We separated because things were going downhill in our relationship. We couldn't see eye to eye on quite a few things. I mean, I thought things were okay, but he, we definitely struggled. We struggled as a couple. There was a lot of arguing. He was very emotionally and at times physically abusive in our relationship. And it got to a point where I had said to our oldest Hannah so many times, don't ever let a man speak to you the way he speaks to me. And one day it just hit me. And I thought, you idiot. What are you teaching your kids? And
Mm-hmm.
it was pretty much at that moment when I decided I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't do it for me and I couldn't do it for them. I had tried to hold on for so long. And
Yeah.
it just comes to a point where you have to make that decision. And I had to put my kids first.
Mm-hmm. And now, in hindsight, you do believe that he was probably abusing drugs for
Yes.
a portion of that time.
Yes.
Yeah. I don't think I would be any different than you, to be honest with you. Like, if my husband were using drugs, I just would never suspect it, I guess. Like,
I don't know if it's maybe a fault of mine that I always want to see the good in people,
mm-hmm.
or maybe it's just being involved in a situation where we had kids and we had a house, and you don't want to be the one to tear your family apart, ever.
But also, it sounds like you're thinking that the using was kind of going on probably for most of the time that you were together. Like, whether it was consistently or not, there were the ebbs and flows of it
Yeah.
potentially. So then no one moment would stick out. You know what I mean? Like, this is when
Right.
things changed.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't until after we separated that it really hit me. Somebody said something to me one day, you know, she just said, like, he's got to be using. And I said, there's no way. And I think I was just in such denial at the time. Like, I just didn't want it to be my reality. I didn't want it to be the reality for my kids, because I'd seen what it was like with him living in the house, and I'd seen, you know, the anger and the rage, and, you know, the thought of us now being separated and him having the kids alone without me there, you know, to kind of protect them, was a very, very scary thought.
Yeah. Because you had always been there, I guess, to buffer anything. Like, you did say that he was a little bit emotional and could be physically abusive, but if you were there, then you could see what was happening and you
I could
could
take the kids and
intervene and
leave.
you
I could tell
exactly.
him, you know, you need to take a break. I could tell him I'm going to drive today. Like, just all sorts of things like that, that, you know, you don't have those safeguards in place anymore.
Right. Yeah.
And
And
then, you
you're
know,
relinquishing a sense of control over the situation.
absolutely. And it's a very, very scary situation to be in. And then, you know, to turn and look at my kids, and, you know, Hannah was 10, she wasn't quite 11 yet. And she really had to take on that role of the protector of her brothers, and having to sit there and watch her go through that and have to grow up so fast when she was in reality so little, it was a devastating thing to watch as a mother.
Mm-hmm. It would be. And so how did you keep going?
I don't know. I really don't know.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I look back on it now and I think about all the stuff. I mean, all the stuff that we went through, and how we are all still standing and we are all still moving forward, is beyond me.
Mm-hmm.
But we're here and we made it. And I just kept telling the kids, you know, we'll stick together. We're strong and we can make it. And
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. How, I don't know if you feel comfortable talking about this because it's your kids' experience, but how was it all for the kids?
I think they almost felt like they were in a tornado. I think, you know, he was very negative about me. He said a lot of things he shouldn't have said. And I know you hear all these things and you read all these things through a separation, and even without the drug abuse and the
Right.
anger, there's that component to the separation where you don't want to involve your kids in it. So I tried to walk a really straight line with them. I tried not to say anything negative about their dad. I tried to leave it where it was. Dad's house stays at dad's house. You want to talk to me about it? Great. If you don't, that's fine. But I think it was almost like I had to bring them back to center when they came home. So they'd go see their dad for the weekend. And then for 2 or 3 days following that, they were a disaster. And I'd finally get them back. I mean, I certainly don't want to take credit. They would finally get themselves back to a place where they were in a good place and their heads were in the right space. And then they would go back and see him again. And you know what? I don't want to knock him, because he did try. He really did try at times. The kids did have some good times with their dad. But in general,
I think also, though, like, I think it's common that those transition days, just from what I hear from other people who've gone through divorce and maybe not as like tumultuous a situation as yours, but those transitions are hard.
very, very hard.
Mm-hmm.
All I know is the whirlwind we were in.
Absolutely. And there were a lot of other factors at play for sure in your situation. So you had all this time, and then last year when he died, because I'm in a situation where I'm grieving and parenting grieving children, but your situation was so different, but yet you're still kind of in this similar circumstance now. So what was that like for you? And then how do you support the kids? Because obviously it was, I would imagine, and not that we compare losses, but a much greater loss for them.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so we had a kind of an added level of complication with his death because he told Hannah he was going to do it. He told her 2 days beforehand. So it added just a whole nother level of complication to the situation.
Did she say anything to you?
So she did. She had gotten his mom to get involved. And I mean, he was so far gone, I think, at that point that he really didn't understand the gravity of his words.
Not that it was her responsibility to get help
No.
for him, but more so, did she like say something?
She did. Yeah. She was
Yeah.
a mess for a couple of days. And then, so that was the Saturday night that he had told her. And then on the Tuesday morning, early morning at 3:45 in the morning, my phone rang. And it was Paul's dad phoning me. And as soon as I picked up the phone, I said, "Oh my God." And he's like, "I have something to tell you." And my heart just sank. I mean, I burst into tears. I mean, it's so complicated because I burst into tears, not because I was mourning the loss, but because I didn't know how I was going to break it to my kids. They didn't have a dad anymore.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and all I could think about was what do I say? And just how are they going to be okay without him? You know, that was probably the worst conversation I have ever had to have with my kids. So what happened was his dad called me, and then in about half an hour, his dad, his mom, and his two sisters showed up in the driveway. And I went out to meet them. It's probably about 4:15, 4:30 at this point. And then they asked if they could come in. And the five of us sat down and woke the kids up, and we told them what happened. And I really struggled with, do I tell them alone? Do I tell them, you know, with his family? Do I wake them up? Do I not wake them up? Like, I didn't know what to do.
There's no playbook.
No, and that's been the hardest part about all of this, is that there is no playbook, and there's no set of rules to follow. So we told them, and like Hannah, they all really lost it, but Hannah really, she said, I knew he was going to do it, and why would he do that? And they all, it was a rough day.
Of course.
That's for sure.
You mentioned that he struggled with mental health. Like, so did he suffer from depression?
He did. I mean, he had been, for most of our relationship, he had been kind of off and on medication for depression, and I'm not sure what the exact diagnosis was.
Okay.
He didn't really openly share that information with me, but he didn't regularly take his medication when we were together. So I don't know if, I'm sure that the street drug use didn't help in terms of his mental health. From what I understand, they tend to go hand in hand. But like I say, I don't know what the diagnosis was, but it was something along those lines. He did struggle. He had, like I said before, he had a lot of childhood trauma that I don't think he ever fully dealt with.
Yeah.
And I don't know the reason why, the addiction took him like it did. But my hope is that my children can learn something from this.
It's come up before that we all grew up in a time where you didn't really talk about mental health. And especially, I think, from a man's perspective, and a
I was
man
thinking
who
the
like
same thing.
works in the trades, and like, you're supposed to be like a man's man, and that makes you weak. And whatever happened to you as a child, like, you're a man now, and that's just not an issue. And he kind of, because I did know Paul, like, he struck me as that kind of guy. And you guys were born and raised in this neighborhood, which we're in the city, but it is a very small town feel, coming from someone
Mhm.
who grew up in a small town. That there's that whole piece too, I think, where like, what will people think?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think he thought he was fine.
Hmm.
And I mean, I don't struggle with my mental health, so I don't really have much to compare it to. But from what I've read, sometimes when you're on medication for anxiety, depression, anything like that, you get to a point where you're feeling okay, and you think, okay, I don't need this anymore. And
Hmm.
unless you have somebody really there holding your hand to tell you you need to continue to do this for you, maybe you decide you're okay.
I
Hmm.
think, it could probably get exhausting. Like, why do I have to take this every day? I feel good. I mean, I can resonate with that with my own medication. I missed today, but I've been okay. Like, it's fine, not intentionally or anything. Not like I don't need it at all anymore, but you miss a day here and there. And if you're really busy, and if you're throwing in other recreational medications, then whether it's intentional or not, forgetting your meds, I would imagine it's not uncommon.
Hmm.
And then add in the fact that, oh, I'm feeling good, so I don't need this today.
Hmm.
Yep.
So is that what you think sort of happened with Paul? That he wasn't probably taking the right medication?
Like I say, I don't know what the diagnosis was, and I don't want to sound like I do
Yeah.
because I don't know really deep down what he struggled with. I think he hid a lot of what he struggled with. It
Yeah.
was just who he was. And for whatever reason, he didn't really share outwardly a lot of that stuff, especially with me.
I think that's probably true for a lot of people. And there's also a lot of people who are self-medicating by using street drugs, right? And you use the drugs so that you don't have to feel and you don't have to think about whatever those things are. You don't have to talk about them because you can forget about them.
And then, unfortunately, I guess some of the unlucky are the ones who get hooked right in with those street drugs. And it's this spiral that they just can't get out of. And there's a big part of me that feels really sorry for Paul because I know that he could be a good dad. The drugs took hold, the mental health took hold, and he just couldn't find a way out.
Well, and when you're suppressing everything, I just think of the image of a balloon, which
Mm-hmm.
is what they do with kids when they're dealing with big feelings. Like, you keep stuffing things into it and it just keeps getting bigger and bigger. What happens to a balloon? It explodes.
Mm-hmm.
So you can either explode, or I think in Paul's case, or in those cases, it's almost like an implosion.
Yeah, absolutely.
As a human, we can only handle so much. You can only handle keeping so much in and masking so much.
Mm-hmm. And I worry about that with my kids. I mean, I've really tried to kind of push the issue of therapy with the kids. They've been relatively reluctant to engage, but more so recently, they've been more willing.
Mm-hmm. And that might be something that, you know, they revisit over time, right? As
Mm-hmm.
they get older and process things in a different way. So you did wake the children up and you did tell them.
Mm-hmm.
And I know you mentioned that he had told Hannah that he was going to do this. So Hannah, I guess, knows how he died, but the other children as well.
They know, yeah. I mean, he didn't hide anything from the kids in terms of his addiction or his feelings or anything like
Okay.
that. So,
So you were separated for quite a few years, I think.
we were, yeah, almost 4
And
years.
so during that 4 years, he was pretty open with them.
He was, yeah. It was one of the things he always said about honesty, and I think it may have something to do with the 12 steps, that 12-step program for addiction recovery.
Yeah.
Honesty is part of it. And, in my opinion, maybe he took it too far with our kids. They were relatively young and maybe they shouldn't have known everything that they knew, but that was his way of dealing with it. And he told them everything.
Right.
Yeah, so they definitely know what happened. His family claims it was an accident. I'm not so sure, especially given the circumstances, but, everybody's allowed to have their own opinion.
Yeah. And so what has life been like since then?
This is going to sound horrible to say, but relieving.
Mhm.
Before our separation, when we were separated, he was not nice to me at all. My phone would light up with a text message or an email, and it would be some sort of abusive message about how awful I was. And that stopped when he died.
Right. And he was saying things to the kids a little bit about you as well.
Yeah, he tended to lean on the kids quite a bit emotionally as well. If he was having a hard day, he would send pictures of himself crying or tell them how lonely he was. And they carried a lot of that around on their shoulders and they felt bad for their dad.
Of course.
A lot of the time, they were put in a position where they kind of had to be the emotional caregiver for him. It started with Hannah for a couple years, and then she got to a point where she said, Dad, I don't want to deal with this anymore. And then Thomas became his crutch, for lack of a better word. And he really, all of them will tell you he really favorited Thomas. So he spent a lot of time with Thomas, and he would spend a lot of time messaging Thomas. And, so I think from that perspective for the kids, it was a bit relieving too, but it's left a big hole in their heart. I think they always hoped that he would get better. And really deep down, I did too.
Yeah.
I would have loved to have been able to celebrate Christmas with Paul and the kids and just the five of us together. But there was no way that was ever going to happen.
Not at the rate they were going.
No, definitely not. It would have been nice to spend birthdays with the kids. There was always a little part of me that was hopeful that he would turn himself around, not for my sake, for their sake.
Yeah. And this is a person that, you had loved, you'd known for a very, very long time. So I'm assuming in that you knew the good parts of him as well. And so I have to imagine that you knew that was in there somewhere.
Yeah. I hadn't seen it for a really long time.
Yeah, but you have that hope that.
Absolutely. And how nice would it be for my kids to see that? You see other people around you co-parenting so well, or at least outwardly co-parenting so well.
Right.
Yeah. And we couldn't. We just couldn't. Despite best efforts on both sides. And that's not to say that, he's the only one to blame, because it takes two to tango. But I did have hope. And when he died, that hope was gone.
And as you said, for the kids as well, that they always hoped that he was going to get better too.
Yeah.
Well, as they would, right? Your first attachments are to your parents.
What is the relationship like with his family now? Or does a relationship even exist?
So between the kids and his family is a great relationship. They see his family about once every 3 to 4 weeks. They're good to reach out to plan things and just dinners, birthday dinners or whatever. They see them quite a bit. Things are, I would say, rocky between them and me, but they were rocky in the separation.
Right.
I think they blame me for a lot of what happened to Paul. And that's, a tough burden to carry on my part, because I know that it wasn't me. And I have to regularly tell myself, you didn't make that decision for him.
Yeah.
I tell the kids all the time, we are not responsible for the actions of other people or the words of other people. We can only be responsible for the things that we do and the things that we say.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can't carry that.
No.
But, I can see that somebody who's lost a family member in that way might feel angry and might want to blame somebody.
Especially when you're talking about like parents losing a child.
Absolutely. Or sisters losing a brother.
Yeah. But, I think that you hear so often about like the order of things, right? And parents burying a child is out of order. That's unnatural. And in this situation where it seems plausible to have someone to blame, whatever that means, it makes sense. It's crappy, but it makes sense
Yeah.
why they might feel that way, right?
Yeah, but crappy for Amber to be on the receiving
Yeah,
end.
no,
Yeah.
absolutely. Well, crappy for anybody, like crappy for anybody to be on the receiving end of that. Like, it's not fair. Nothing
Yeah, I
about
mean,
it is fair.
the funeral was very difficult.
Well, I wanted to go back to that because, we weren't fully locked down, but then we went back into lockdown shortly
But
after.
it was
Yeah.
pandemic.
It was
It
pandemic.
was really pandemic here in Ontario, I think,
It
more
was-
than like it was in other places.
Yeah, so it was a very small service. His family asked that I didn't bring anybody with me. So I wasn't allowed to bring my parents or anybody with me,
Mhm.
which was really difficult for me. I really, really struggled with it because I knew how difficult that day was going to be for my kids. And I knew that I had to be strong to sit there and to support them. But knowing that I didn't have any support and knowing that everybody else in that room hated me, it was a really, really difficult thing to do, to go to that funeral. But I certainly wasn't going to miss it for the sake of my kids.
Yeah. But then you have to go in there and try to hold your head up high.
Mhm.
And like you said, be strong for your children. It sounds very difficult.
Yeah, and I mean, and to sit there and in the moment, you're filled with all these emotions, right? Not only just the loss, but the anger that came out of me in those first couple days after he had passed away.
Yeah.
Just why could you not have pulled yourself together to sit there in that funeral home and watch and listen to all of the kind things that they said about Paul? It was really difficult to hear those things
Because you
knowing
weren't there.
I was not there at
Yeah,
all.
no.
And I mean, now I can certainly sit back and reflect on it. I'm like, like he was a good guy at times. And he could be a good dad when he wanted to be.
Yeah.
But, in the moment, I was so angry. I was angry at him for leaving his kids. And I was angry at him for leaving me to raise them alone. And I was angry at him for not pulling himself together.
Mhm.
And how could you not? I sat there and I looked at my kids and just like, how could you take one look at them and not be able to be there for them or make the conscious decision to put those drugs in your body, knowing that there's a chance that you might not make it? I can't fathom it. Even as I sit here now, I cannot fathom the idea of doing something like that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think anger is so, I mean, it's one of the official stages of grief, but I know from my personal experience, that's literally the only thing that got me through those first few weeks. Like, that kept me moving forward was just like my rage. And my rage was just at life and everything in general. But I mean, sitting there and you feeling this anger at him, knowing everybody else is feeling this anger at you, like that just, because that's where their anger was. So it was getting them through. Like, it just all sounds
Messy.
Yeah.
such
And it
so
was-
fucked up.
For sure. And I mean, the anxiety of the day and like leading up to the funeral. And I played over in my head 100 times. And what am I going to do if one of them says something to me that's negative? Because I'm not good at confrontation and I will cry at the drop of a hat.
Mm-hmm.
It's just how I deal with things.
Mm-hmm.
And it was after the funeral. We were still all in the funeral home and Paul had been cremated. So they had a big urn and each of the kids individually got teeny little urns. And they still have them. They're in their rooms now. And we were standing there and Paul's sister walked up to me and I was holding two urns. And I made a comment about the urn. I can't even remember what I said now, but all I remember is she turned to me and she said, "Well, it's your fault." And my jaw just about hit the floor. And I said, "Excuse me?" Like I couldn't even really get words out for a couple minutes, but eventually I said, "Excuse me." And she said, "Yeah, because you said the kids wanted their own urns." And it was just like my throat was closed up and my heart was in my throat and I couldn't even get any words out. But like I had spent almost the entire week preparing for that moment when somebody was going to say something negative
Right.
to me.
You just had your
Mhm.
backup because you just.
And she didn't.
expected
It didn't come from a place like that, but it was the way it came out, the way it presented itself. It was just like it stopped me in my tracks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's not how she intended it. Like she
No.
wasn't trying to, right?
No.
But you were there because you expected it because you.
Well, you were
just-
anticipating
you-
it,
I
right?
was.
And again, you were in your anger and they were in their and like anger is never the right place to approach anything, like
No.
being there in that for anything.
Right.
But it's just, again, it's like, it's a stage, whatever a stage means, of grief for a reason, because that anger is just so common, whatever your loss is.
Yeah.
And however it comes around, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think the stages of grief are very, very fluid. I just finished paying for Hannah's braces, and it's been like 2.5 years now, and I paid for every cent out of my pocket. And the thought of, like, why did I have to do that on my own? That sucks. I wish I had had a partner to do that. Or I have to
Yeah.
pay hockey fees, and I'm like, oh, kidding me? Like, here we go again. The financial burden of raising 3 kids alone is huge.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it is.
Yeah.
And then also the emotional burden, I think, is exacerbated in this time that we're living in too. Regardless of, even if he was still here, like for all intents and purposes, you would be doing that. A lot of that, I think, you would
Yeah,
be
I
bearing
was.
that weight anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I was financially bearing
but-
that weight essentially since we separated.
Right. And even emotionally and all of that as
Yeah.
well. But just in terms of like, do the kids go to school, and do we, are we vaccinating them, and like all of that, like personally, and again, different situations, but just, I hated having to make those choices on my own, because
Yeah, I
there's
mean-
no one else who cares as much about those kids
For sure.
as their
For sure.
parents.
A lot of the time I'll consult my mom because, she loves them like I do.
Yes. Yeah.
But
I mean, they
big,
do,
big
but it's
decisions,
different. It's just different,
It's
though.
definitely different. I mean, the big decisions are definitely hard. When it comes to the day-to-day stuff, I find that it's more sometimes the discipline stuff, because I don't have somebody to bounce things off of. Am I doing everything right? Am I screwing these kids up?
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to taking a morning off school, I'm like, well, whatever, take your morning off school, because nobody can give me what for about it. So that's kind of relieving that I can make those, those small decisions on my own. But when it comes to the bigger ones, for sure, having somebody to bounce something off of, and not that I really had a lot of that when we had separated before he passed away.
Right.
And to be fair, I made most of the decisions on my own anyway, even when we were together.
Yeah.
But at least,
feel it-
knowing that you have that partner to kind of,
Yeah.
to back you up if you need it.
Well, and even having that hope that it would kind of turn around, right?
Yeah.
While you were bearing all of that on your own anyway, there was that hope that it wouldn't always be that way.
Right.
And now, like, you don't get to have that anymore. I was thinking, after the funeral and after everything, and as you're moving forward, and then, we get thrown into lockdown, and like hockey is a big thing in your family.
It is, yeah.
And that was taken away from the kids. And I have to imagine, I know the lockdowns and the isolation for us, just in our situation, were really trying. And I have to imagine, even again, prior to this, losing their sports and stuff was a big deal. And I have to, like, what was that like?
I mean, I think the losing the sports thing was harder on Hannah. Hannah has really relied on being on the ice to kind of get her through mentally, through everything, the separation, through her father's death. So for her, it was quite difficult. And Hannah's a very social kid, so she struggled quite a bit with the lack of social contact. I mean, I think the first lockdown was probably the worst. And because it was the most isolating, everybody was scared. Nobody knew what this COVID thing was, and nobody wanted to go near anybody. And mind you, the kids also listened a lot more to the rules at that point than they did come the third lockdown, right?
Right. Yeah.
But again, those decisions, those parenting decisions, do you let them see other people? Do you not? How far do you want this to go? I mean, I know there were a lot of situations where hockey was still going on through all of the lockdowns. My kids weren't on the ice during the very strict lockdowns, but when they could be on the ice outside of the city of Toronto, their coaches made it happen, and they still got to be on the ice. I'm also fortunate that I have 3 of them, and they can kind of spend time with each other, and they could spend time with me, right? It's not like they were only children.
No,
So,
absolutely.
yeah. And I mean, we have neighbors very close, and so it was okay. I mean, I I don't, like I said before, I don't have anything to compare it to.
Right.
Mhm.
You know, the parenting through a lockdown, through the death of, you know, their other parent, it's been our reality.
Yeah.
Mhm. And like, how do you say what the pandemic would have looked like if Paul was there? Like, you can't make that comparison. You
No.
just, we don't have that information.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that happens so often in life, that these things kind of happen and we're like, I don't know in any other way.
Hmm.
You're like, we're just doing what was handed to us.
Yeah. Well, you asked the question before, like, how am I kind of still standing? I don't know.
Yeah.
I really have no idea, but here we are. And we've just passed the 1 year mark of his death. And
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, that was definitely a difficult 1 year mark. I think there was a lot of anticipation leading up to it. It was his birthday a week prior to his death. And that day really threw Hannah for a really big loop. We had talked about what are we going to do on the 1 year anniversary, and we had decided as the four of us that we were going to take the day off. I wasn't going to work, they weren't going to school, and I said we could do something fun. We could hang out at home, and they just wanted to kind of hang out at home. So that's what we had decided on. But they tried to push it and say, can we have Dad's birthday off too? And guys, come on, not 2 days in 2 weeks. We got to choose one. Let's try and be realistic here. But
Right.
his birthday was worse than the 1 year around here.
It's those days, in my experience, it's the days you don't
Mhm.
expect to be hard that are hard,
Yeah.
or it's the anticipation of the hard day that when you look back, when you're on the day, it's like, oh, this is okay. But those days were really bad.
Yeah. Yeah. The
It's just
anticipation was
in my
definitely.
experience, that's how it's been for us anyway.
And then his family reached out and wanted to do like a memorial 1 year kind of dinner with the kids. And I was going to respond yes. And then I thought, no, you know what? I'm going to ask the kids. I'm going to see how they feel about the situation. When I asked them all independently, and the boys were adamant that they did not want to go. They're not in a place where they want to memorialize their dad. I think they feel the loss every day in
Mhm.
their own way, and they don't want to sit around and reminisce, whereas his family is in a different position. And I don't know if it's that the kids are kids and the adults are adults. I mean, the kids do have young cousins who are similar ages on that side. There's 4 girls, and I don't know how they feel exactly because I haven't spoken with them, but I know my kids, my boys specifically, they don't want to sit around and reminisce about their dads. In their own way, they do. They talk about them all the time.
Yeah,
And
I think it's common, especially with older folks, to want to do that stuff and to have these like set times where we talk about a person.
yeah,
And like, I know for us, Warren's just like a part of our day, from like, oh my God, you look just like your daddy there, or remember when we did this with daddy. And it's just, I don't know, it's just like in normal conversation. But they would never want to just sit down and like, I wouldn't say never, but generally, if they want to like sit down and have that time, we like look at pictures and we do, but like that's just not, I don't think that's how kids work.
I think it's more a child directed thing as opposed to like a planned
Yeah. Or
pre-scheduled thing.
just or
It's not
just
that, it's not the formality of like, okay, we're going to get together for dinner on
Yeah.
this day and we're going to talk
Yeah.
about daddy.
Yeah.
yeah, like they appreciate that I will tell them when they do things that remind me of
Mhm.
dad, or remember when we did this with dad. I feel like for kids it needs to be more organic than that. We had an experience when my kids were visiting my in-laws, and I think it's hard for them to see the boys because one of them looks a lot like their dad,
Mm-hmm.
and I can imagine that that's got to be very hard. And I think maybe they thought that the kids didn't hear them talking and having some feelings, and one of them did, and it made him really uncomfortable. They probably don't want to be around that.
No, I mean, Thomas will come home sometimes and he'll say, so and so said to me that I look just like my dad. And it really will throw him for a loop. But if he sits there and he says, does this make me look like my dad, or am I acting like my dad? And I say, yes, that's okay to him.
Right.
And I don't think it's ill-intentioned from his family at all. I just don't think
No,
they
no,
understand
no.
it from the mind of a child who's lost a parent.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I
Mhm.
feel that. I felt bad having to say, like, they're not okay with this. So I understand why you might feel this way, but it makes them uncomfortable and it might make them not want to come when you want to see them.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, unfortunately,
Yeah. I mean, those conversations can be kind of tough to have too, especially knowing that the relationship between his family and I is strained. Those
Mhm.
conversations are difficult because I don't want to strain things any further, but I
Right.
need to make sure that I put my kids' needs and their wants first.
well, yeah, as the mother
That's
and the
it.
only parent, that's your job. And it's not without recognizing what could be hard for them, but when it comes down to it, as their mom, that's your job.
Yeah.
So where do you go from here?
We just keep on trucking.
Right? Exactly.
I mean, what can you do?
I feel
You're
like
dealt
it,
the cards you're dealt.
and as a
Yeah.
parent especially, um, it feels like there's so much to lose if you just like stop moving or don't keep going, right?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I see it in my youngest. He's brought it up quite a lot. He has, I would call them irrational fears, but I don't know if that's the right way to put it. That he has a constant fear of me not being here anymore.
Right.
I had a bit of an injury at the ball field on the weekend where I cut my finger open pretty good, and I have stitches in my finger right now. And I was in the hospital for 4 hours on Saturday evening, and he FaceTimed me probably 6 times. Mom, are you okay? I said, Charlie, I promise I'm coming home. I just need to wait to get these stitches in my finger. Are you okay? And it's so concerned.
Mhm.
Regular nightmares about, the car going off the bluffs or the car blowing up, or I mean, I don't think they're irrational fears. I don't think that was maybe the right word, but they're just these
No, I
big, big fears. Like, you're my only parent left and something's gonna happen to you. So it's constant reassurance.
Well, that security, that knowing that your parents always are always going to be there has been taken
Hmm.
from him,
For sure.
right? He knows that parents can die
mhm.
in a way that other children don't.
And that it can be really sudden too,
Yeah,
right?
Hmm.
Yeah,
because lots
no,
of
I
people
we
never consider that their parents could die. Like lots of children, I don't think it ever crosses their mind
no.
Yeah.
until their friend's parent dies or something like that. But he knows
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
people can die, not just old grandpas or
Yeah.
whatever, right? Which
Yeah.
Or
is
And
someone
that's
who's
it's a
sick or
really
whatever, yeah.
unfortunate reality. I mean, a
mhm,
lot of the time in his sports, he's if people don't know, they come up to him and they say, how come we never see your dad?
oh,
And you have to have the conversation of, I don't have a dad. That's what they say. And so I try to at least let people know to, not overshare, but, by the way, he lost his dad last year, just so that there's no surprises. But that's something that unfortunately it's part of their reality now. The little
I mean, can
comments.
people just not ask things like that? Not everybody has a dad.
Mhm.
I mean, my circumstances are different, but I grew up without a father. And my entire life, even as an adult, people say things or ask questions like, you go to a friend's house and they're like, so what do your parents do? And I'm like, well, it's just my mom. Right. Or they say things like, even I meet people now, they're like, oh yeah, like where do your parents live? I'm like, well, it's just my mom. Right. And I mean, the number of times I've had to explain that is innumerable. I have no idea, but it definitely comes up a lot. And eventually you get really good at just shutting it down, if that makes sense.
But I'm sure it stings every time you hear it. I'm sure, it
Yeah,
hurts.
very frequently.
I mean, we know enough now, and it's at least out there enough that people have all different kinds of familial structures. Like,
Mhm.
what? It's so, anyway, that's just my own thing on it because I worry about that for my own kids.
I think of it from the perspective of how will my kid feel if it comes up. So I
Yeah.
really try and take on that, that protective mom role where I'm
Yeah.
like, if this person is their coach at hockey or, maybe a friend's parent or something like that, just to kind
Yeah.
of let them know, like, this is what happened, kind of is,
Yeah.
and I never go into detail. Sometimes people ask, but just, this, he lost his dad, and just so you know, kind of thing. And it leads to a little bit of awkward silence. But at the end of the day,
Yeah.
knowing or hoping that it's not going to come back where somebody says to one of the kids, how come I never see your dad, or go home and play catch with your dad.
Yeah.
That's comforting enough to bring
Yeah.
it up.
Well, and it's like it is inevitable that things like that. I mean, your kids are a little bit older, but little kid said to Wyatt once, like, I'm going to tell your mom and dad that you took my ball. And he lost it. And like, normally he wouldn't faze him, but we have those moments where that stuff can sting more.
Mm-hmm.
And there's days where you can handle it more, where you
Mhm.
can just say they live in Scarborough, or you can just be like,
Yeah.
I don't have my dad, like, I don't have a dad, or my dad died, or whatever it is. And it doesn't like stop you. And then there will be those times that it does. And
Yeah.
it sucks, but it just does,
Yeah,
unfortunately.
we had a situation at school last year with Charlie where a kid was quite mean to him about something along the lines of, "Oh, I forgot you don't have a dad." And Charlie lost it. I think he must have seen red. His fists went flying. He tackled the kid to the ground. I got a phone call from the principal, and I said to the principal, "I'm not sure what you want me to do. Like, I can't reprimand the kid for seeing red when he lost his dad 3 months ago or 2 months ago. I'm sorry that he tackled the kid. I'm sorry that he punched the kid. And I'm sure he's sorry in hindsight,
Right.
Right.
but those emotions are so big, especially at 9 years old.
Well, and so new.
Yeah, so new too. Yeah.
And let's be real, he's in the same class with Logan. It's not like those kids aren't familiar with somebody who is in that position.
Yes, for sure.
Unfortunately, how
Yeah.
messed up is that? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It is one
It's
of those things, like there's no playbook for Charlie on how he's supposed to respond to something like that. And
I mean,
some
there are
days
days
someone
where you
might say
can,
something and it might not elicit that response. And sometimes it will. And like you said, you're going to ground him. Like, what are you going to do about that?
I took him for ice cream. It's what I did.
Well, because he clearly had a very emotional day
Right.
and you're responding to that because he's
but
not the type of kid who's going around punching people regularly. So you know that if he did that, it was inspired by some really big feelings.
Right.
they can barely control, like, if someone says they're not their best friend that day.
Right.
Right?
You're
Like,
not invited to
so-
my birthday party.
Yes, the birthday party. But I like to say that dealing with this is like parenting on steroids.
Mhm.
Because everything you thought you maybe had learned is gone, and it's that much more intense. Yeah,
That makes sense.
but
What was your relationship like with Paul's family when you were married? Was it amicable or
yes.
strained then as well? Okay.
No, I mean, it was amicable. They were pretty good to me. They always had an opinion. I always felt like in their eyes I was never a good enough mom, and I was never a good
Mhm.
enough wife. And maybe that's, my own anxiety getting the best of me, but
Yeah.
it was kind of the impression that I always got. I mean, there was one time I took on the Easter walk that the kids are going to this Friday. There was one time I took Hannah in rain boots because it was muddy, but it was cold. So it was a little snowy. The place they go is like almost down in like a valley in a park. So it was relatively snowy down there, but it wasn't snowy up top. And there were many comments made about the way that I dressed her.
Right.
Little things here and there that kind of just added up over time, but definitely really strained after we separated.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, is to be expected. in a messy separation to be very expected.
Mm-hmm. Do you foresee any future where you all get along?
I don't think there will ever be a place for me at their table
Okay.
going forward. I really don't. I'm hopeful that maybe one day there will be, for the sake of our kids, that we can do stuff together.
Mm-hmm.
But honestly, I don't foresee it happening. I mean, my relationship with Paul's father is probably the most amicable of
Okay.
all of them. Paul's parents are not together. They haven't been since Paul was, I believe Paul was 11 when they separated. Yeah. So, I mean, I could pick up the phone and talk with his dad at any time, or his dad's wife. They've always been great. But the relationship with the rest of them is relatively strict.
So if someone was listening to this episode, what would you hope that they could take away from this?
I mean, if I was talking to somebody who was kind of in the throes of it, I'd tell them to just keep going. You're way stronger than you think you are. You have no idea kind of how you can pull through until you're on the other side of it. And I'm not even all the way on the other side of it. I mean, I'm only a year out
Mm-hmm.
from his death, and I'm only about 5 years out from our separation. So really, I'm
Mm-hmm.
kind of a baby in this process. But looking back, how many hard days we had. You get up and as a mom, you do, and you keep doing until the doing is done, and then you go to bed and you do it all again the next day.
Mm-hmm. Imagine that. And then rinse and repeat.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then you do it all
And
over again,
because
right?
as a solo parent, you're it. If you don't do it, it doesn't get done. I have learned to enlist the help of my children a little bit more. Like, can you
Mhm.
take the dog out, and can you take the garbage out? Things
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah. I think you have to.
But I find a lot of
Yes.
that, I end up still carrying the mental load of that to-do list that I give the kids anyway.
Well, thank you so much, Amber, for
Yes.
coming on and taking the time and sharing with us.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Now What Pod. If you've enjoyed this episode, leave us a review. Your ratings and reviews help more people like you find our podcast.
Don't forget to subscribe and share this episode with someone you think would love it. You can find us on social media at the Now What Pod. Until next time, we're Tisha and Jen. Remember, your story matters and you do too.